Good morning, and welcome to the Multi-State Freight Working Group meeting on industrial real estate trends and considerations. I'm Mary Amin, Executive Director of the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. For those of you who are not familiar with the NJTPA, we are one of the 10 metropolitan planning organizations and councils of government that comprise the Metropolitan Area Planning, or MAP Forum. The MAP Forum coordinates planning work across a region that includes parts of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. And as the name states, the MAP Forum's multi-state freight working group focuses on freight-related issues such as truck parking, as well as goods movement trends affecting the larger region. The MAP Forum also has a multi-state resilience working group focused on vehicle electrification, greenhouse gas mitigation, and other related topics. You can learn more about these working groups and the MAP on our website. We'll share the link in the chat box. I just wanted to briefly thank everyone for joining us today, and now I'm pleased to introduce Middlesex County Commissioner Charles Kenny, who chairs the NJTPA's Freight Initiatives Committee, to tell you a bit more about today's program. Commissioner Kenny.
Good morning, and thank you, Mary, for the introduction, and good morning to everyone. New Jersey, and really the entire MAP Forum region, has seen a profound growth in industrial space in recent years. In the NJTPA region alone, industrial real estate has increased by more than 50 million square feet in the last 4 years, for a total of more than 862 million square feet. The buildings range in size from 5,000 to 1 million square feet, and they're occupied by a wide variety of users. As we work together to plan for the future of goods movement, it's important for us to understand and address the industrial real estate needs, such as worker requirements, truck and employee movements, and the role these operations play in our larger region. Today, we'll hear from Trans-Western Development Company, a logistics group, which will present an overview of industrial real estate in the region. Then the Lanigan engineers will give a presentation on truck movements associated with the different types of buildings and industrial operations. You'll also hear about a variety of tools and guides that have been developed by 3 metropolitan planning organizations. Please note that today's workshop is being recorded, and we'll be posting the presentation online after the event. You'll be able to find them at the link in the chat box. Also, we've applied for 2 AICP credits for today's event. To obtain the credits, please type your name and email address in the chat box. I'm now going to turn the program over to Ann Strauss-Weeder, Director of Freight Planning at NJTPA, to provide a quick overview of the GoToMeeting and introduce our speakers. Ann?
Thank you, Commissioner, and welcome everyone. This workshop is being recorded, and as such, we ask that all participants mute themselves and turn off their webcams. Please post any questions that you have during the presentations in the chat box. I'll be monitoring those and posting them to the presenters after they complete their presentations. If you are seeking AICP credit, as the Commissioner noted, please put your name, email address, and AICP in the chat box so we can contact you. We are applying for 2 credits in that regard. The speaker bios for today are also going to be posted in the chat box with a link, as well as the agenda. The recordings and the presentations that you'll be seeing today will also be posted after this event concludes. And with that, Jacob, if we go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce our first 2 speakers. Brian from Trans-Western, and when he completes, we'll be hearing from Dan Desario of Lanigan Engineering. Following Dan's presentation, we'll be having a Q&A period. So with that, Brian, please get us going, and welcome. Brian, you're muted at the moment.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay there. Let's hope that stays on.
Brian, you're still muted. Now you're active.
Okay, I'm going to not touch any buttons at this point. Hopefully that'll stay. So thanks again for the opportunity to present this morning. I'm going to give a overview of the industrial market, starting with the more local area, and then widening the perspective a little bit to the region, and touching lastly on national situations as well. So with that, Jacob, if you could advance to the next slide. I'm going to start with the northern and central New Jersey area. And the job growth continues in the transportation and warehousing sector. Construction workers have been difficult to find. Overall, the supply and demand dynamics are very strong. The overall vacancy rate stands at 3.1% in the second quarter of this year, which is down from the year prior and down from the 5-year average. There are some submarkets that are actually below the 3%, at 1% or even below 1%. So we are really in a fully occupied environment at this point. That is driving growth in asking rents. Currently, the average asking rent is over $10 a square foot, up from $8.89 in the past year. And we see that trend line to continue because of the tight supply and overall high demand. In conjunction with that, sale prices are also at an all-time high at $160 a foot, significantly up from a year ago. And we continue to expect that, call it cap rate compression or sales prices to continue to increase as a function of increasing rents. And again, just a lot of investment capital that is in this sector at the time. Right now, the supply chain congestion does continue. We have record-setting cargo volumes at the ports, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But these supply constraints have led to lease rates well into the teens, especially for new construction. And we are actually touching in the high teens. And there is recently reportedly a lease that's been signed in the Meadowlands in the low $20 square foot triple net rent. Certainly an all-time high, yet still comparatively to New York, very competitive. Next slide, Jacob, please. This reflects the trend lines. Besides the trend lines, the next slide talks a little bit about the demand side, and it continues unabated. There's more than 4.2 million square feet of positive net absorption during the second quarter of this year. The total net absorption was the highest level since the third quarter of 2018, nearly twice what it was compared to the same quarter a year ago. That shows just the amount of activity and the high demand. While the transportation and warehousing industry is responsible for 3/4 of the total square footage, retailers are also signing on with the continued emergence of e-commerce, and they're revising their supply chain as well as their delivery models to their customers. Yeah, next slide, please. As I touched on, we have a historical low vacancy rate of 3.1%. Demand is continuing to outpace supply. There's less than 3% inventory in 17 of 29 submarkets that we're tracking in northern and central New Jersey. During the past 6 years, the vacancy rate has been cut in half, despite the fact, as Commissioner Kennedy referenced, we've added nearly 45 million square feet of new industrial space to the market during that time period. So it's just, if you think about that, we've added 45 million square feet, and yet the vacancy rate has dropped, meaning that we certainly can't even keep up with the demand with that high amount of supply. And that vacancy rate is nearly 200 basis points or 2% lower than the United States average. But if you look at the chart from left to right, back in 2012, you had about a 6% vacancy rate, and now that's dropped down to, 9%, and now it's dropped down to 3%. So from 2012 to 2021, a significant drop in the vacancy rate. Next slide, please. The next slide shows some of the recent leases in the marketplace. Touching on some of these, you have Williams-Sonoma at over 1 million square feet down at Exit 8A. Other retailers would be Melissa and Doug for $500,000, Dream on Me for $425,000, and a project at Transwestern did in Piscataway, General Plumbing Supply, for 300,000 square feet. So you can see with these retailers, there's a wide range of their occupancy requirements. And in addition to those retailers, you also see the transportation and the 3PLs like UPS, FedEx, World Distribution Services, JW Fulfillment, and National Distribution Centers, all ranging anywhere from 300,000 to 875,000 square feet of newly constructed space being leased. Next slide, please. As I said, supply continues to fall short of demand. In 2021 so far, only 2 million square feet has been delivered. It's the lowest total for the first half of the year since 2016. That is not because of any concern as far as putting supply into the market. It's more a reflection of just the difficulty of finding viable sites to develop, and even with sites secured, there's a long approval process. Most times it takes over a year, and that's if there's no environmental remediation or any large offsite components to a project. So while we would like to be able to supply as much as possible, as fast as possible, there are those inherent challenges in a high barrier to entry markets like ours. As of the second quarter of this year, 13 million square feet was under construction, which is a 14% increase year over year. There was a little bit of slowdown when COVID began, just because of the inability to, quite frankly, work on projects unless they were deemed to be a high priority or essential services. Of the product under construction, nearly 40% is pre-leased, like the high demand that we've seen. Tenants are getting into the market much earlier than ever before, and willing to commit much sooner, quite frankly, needing to commit if they want to secure space for their ongoing business needs. As a result of all this, the search for viable sites and the ability to supply tenants the space they need, the marketplace has started to expand. It's going, as we know, west of Pennsylvania, but it's also, going besides west of Pennsylvania, also south, further south, down the Turnpike into neighboring states. Next slide, please. And as I touched on in the beginning, the rental rates are at historic highs, reaching over $10 for an asking rent in the second quarter of this year. The average asking rents increased for 27 consecutive quarters, and it's nearly double the level of 10 years ago. The year-over-year rent growth of 14% in this region is one of the highest in the U.S., and it's the highest since second quarter of 2017. As I said, several submarkets are hitting the teens and high teens in new construction, led by the Meadowlands, with an overall rent of $13.22 per square foot. But again, that's an average. Recent transactions are being reported in the high teens and actually broaching now $20 a square foot in the Meadowlands. Next slide, please. I'm going to now touch a little bit more on the wider region, going next into Lehigh Valley, which is the first market alternative to central northern New Jersey that has been developed in this last cycle. It's one of the hottest industrial markets in the United States, and its level of inventory is growing at one of the fastest rates in the United States. On average, over the past 5 years, 20 million square feet has been developed and absorbed in what we'll call the broader Pennsylvania market of Lehigh Valley, northern Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania. 20 million square feet per year has been developed and absorbed over the past 5 years, which is just amazing when you think you can develop that amount of space and that doesn't put a dent in the vacancy rates. As a result of e-commerce accelerating and high costs and supply constraints, that's a 40% increase in industrial inventory in the Lehigh Valley over the past decade. And even though we delivered 8 million square feet during the past 12 months, the overall vacancy rate decreased by only 70 basis points. Asking rents in Lehigh Valley are up 13% year over year and almost 40% in the past 5 years. Again, tremendous appetite for space that is hard to keep up with. Next slide, please. This is going to address the Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey market. It's also experienced tremendous growth, mainly because, quite frankly, Pennsylvania, anywhere from Lehigh Valley out through Carlisle and past Carlisle and up north as far as Scranton, effectively Pennsylvania is becoming a very land constrained market now, where it used to not be the case. So there is being a drive now more so even into southern New Jersey, down the Turnpike and towards Philadelphia. There's 20 million square feet under construction, nearly triple that of the pre-pandemic levels, reflecting that search to be able to supply new space. Asking rents have increased 16% year over year and almost 60% in the past 5 years. You can see the chart in the lower right corner, that large spike in under construction space. And again, we're still barely keeping up with the demand. Next slide, please. We'll touch on the New York boroughs. Nearly 3/4 of the total industry inventory in New York City is in Brooklyn and Queens. The demand has accelerated, even though there was a slowdown during COVID-19 initially. It's largely attributable to the growth of e-commerce. Consumers have really gotten used to same-day delivery, and it's driven the need, besides now the large regional distribution facilities, for what's known as the last mile facilities. Of 4.6 million square feet delivered in the region during the past 3 years, 3.3 million square feet of it was in Staten Island, and 2/3 of that was leased by Amazon. And the 2 million square feet currently under construction, again, is really underserves the amount of the last mile space that the food and beverage companies are really seeking, which kind of dovetails into the emerging demand for cold storage space, and also will dovetail into Langen's presentation on the challenges in these last mile facilities for parking and how those parking needs vary between different submarkets and different types of facilities. Next slide, please. This one really just underscores, this graphic on the next slide underscores the shift in the region as far as development is concerned. Jacob, could I have the next slide, please? Go. One more. And these two graphics will basically underscore, if you look at the slide on the left, the chart on the left of the, one too many. Here we go, back one, please. There you go. So the graphic on the left shows the Turnpike Corridor, effectively, where you see everything from New York down to Philadelphia, where that was really the focus of development in 16 and 17. Then, built in 2021 or under construction, you can see on the right-hand side how so much more has been developed out through the western markets of Pennsylvania, as I just touched on in those earlier slides. So it really has become a regional market, whereas previously tenants were very focused on submarkets within a state or within a county. And now it's really being viewed, a lot of requirements are viewed on a regional basis, where the tenants will do their searches anywhere from, quite frankly, the New York City boroughs, starting with perhaps Staten Island, down through central New Jersey, and then out as far as western Pennsylvania, evaluating any opportunities they can to meet their requirements. Next slide, please. So on a broader basis, as far as the United States and the U.S. market summary is concerned, the second quarter marked the third consecutive quarter with over 100 million square feet of positive net absorption for the first time since 2018. So again, coming out of COVID-19, the acceleration of e-commerce, there's really been a ramp up of demand and absorption, and the need for supply, trying to keep with that. New inventory delivered to the market was at its lowest level in more than 2 years, as I indicated, only because of the difficulty in acquiring adequate sites and getting those through the development process. The volume of product under construction is 30% higher year over year, and it's double that of year end 2015. But we are really still trying very hard to keep up with that demand. And as you can see on the chart on the right-hand corner, lower right-hand corner, from 2015, where you had 300 million square feet, now you're up in 2021 to 600 million square feet. Next slide, please. Transwestern tracks what we call the Elite 11, which is the top 11 submarkets for logistics supply, logistics business throughout the nation. The one that I would draw your attention to is Lehigh Valley, that has all 4 subcategories that are bolded, which indicates that they're leading of all the Elite 11 in those categories. So not only are they leading in just one, but all 4 of the categories. Even though their inventory is 141 million square feet, relatively small when you compare it to Southern California, almost 2 billion square feet, or to combine Dallas and Houston of 1.5 billion. And then you have New Jersey, which has collectively 744 million between central and northern New Jersey. But between Lehigh Valley, the rental growth annually is at 13%. The next highest really would be Washington, Baltimore, but it's a relatively small submarket, which is driving the rental growth. But then you have quickly right behind it, New Jersey, with a rental growth of 11.7. And that rental growth rate is also a function of the high level of the rents. When you have a smaller rent, you can have a higher percentage increase as a function of that. So once you get into the high teens and even in the $20 rents, you are likely not to see a typical 13% increase, on a rent that high on a year-over-year basis. That trend line will start to flatten out a little bit. All this demand is leading to a lot of speculative development. The availability of capital is very high. Interest rates are still very favorable, which is leading to that speculative development. And but in turn, anywhere from 40 to 75% of that speculative development is pre-leased in any given submarket. So the historical risk that's associated with spec development is really not being experienced in this cycle. Next slide, please. This will touch on the container port traffic a little bit. As of June 2021, the total cargo for the port of New York and New Jersey was nearly 50% higher than the volume of 1 year ago. Again, which really shows the emergence of the economy coming out of COVID-19 and the high demand. If you look at the graphic of the United States there, you'll notice that all those ports being tracked, they're all in the green, but for Seattle Tacoma, which over 2019 it's down, it was down 2.9%, but that's the anomaly. The Port of LA is growing 48% faster than the U.S. average for 2021, and recently set a record for processing 10 million container units in a 12-month stretch. That said, the bottleneck that's occurring on the West Coast due to supply chain issues and land shortages is causing companies to look for more entry points on the East Coast. And that's reflected in the statistics shown for the ports on the East Coast. And then just to wrap it up on the last chart, just a summary and looking ahead. Consumer spending habits have changed forever. You know, we're very convinced of that coming out of COVID-19, things aren't going to go back to what they used to be. And there is that overused term of a new normal, or whatever that may be. Most brick and mortar retailers are investing more in e-commerce than on in-store experience. That's a function of people not necessarily wanting to go into the store environment because of COVID concerns, but also, you know, there's a natural arbitrage for these consumer companies or tenants when they can pay much less for a warehouse and deliver direct to consumers than if they are staffing and paying for a brick and mortar store. Amazon's accounted for nearly 1/3 of the leasing for recent construction, but other retailers and shipping companies are you know, probably equally absorbing the amount of space. Food and beverage is growing, again, hence demand for what we're seeing as emerging speculative sector of cold storage space. We think this all will result in additional job growth within the industrial sector. And so even while we're reporting a fairly high still unemployment rate, we think that there is a demand for warehouse industrial sector labor. So hopefully that will be met. And as reported, you've got record high cargo volumes. We expect that to continue into 2022. And as a result of all of this in our Northeast region and our wider area here, there is now a push into some, we'll call secondary or tertiary markets. For example, outside of Chicago, you know, Transwestern is now pushing up into these Milwaukee suburbs, or within this region, there's also now we're seeing an emergence of interest in trying to find sites into Delaware, a little bit further south, and now also into upstate New York. So that search for viable sites continues, that circle continues to widen. So that will conclude my presentation. I hope everyone found that helpful, and I look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
And thanks, Brian. Certainly what you've said, I can echo in terms of where the work is and the projects that we're involved in. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan DeSario. Some of you may know me, but I'll give you a little background because I always find it interesting to understand a little bit about the speakers when I'm attending sessions. So I do oversee all the traffic and transportation services at Langen Engineering. We are a national firm of about 1,300 employees. I have about 29 years of experience as reflected on the fact that I am completely bald, but I attribute a lot of that to also having 2 kids that drive me nuts. I have lived in Central Jersey my entire life. I grew up in Perth Amboy, 1 block away from a Preferred Freezer warehouse. And I currently live in South Brunswick, essentially adjacent to Exit 8A, which has a large concentration of warehousing in and around that interchange. My home is across from Route 130 from a warehouse that L'Oreal operates, as well as a warehouse that Coca-Cola operates. So essentially, I've been involved with warehousing either directly or indirectly my entire life. Latest count, I'm probably helped entitle over 250 million square feet of warehouse across North America. That number's probably low. It's probably a lot more than that. I am involved with an e-commerce business that you're all familiar with that is headquartered out in the state of Washington and specifically Seattle. So being involved with them has definitely taken me across the country and has given me some insight as to the evolution of what we think is warehousing, but it's morphed into something more than that. You may notice my 3 initials are DDD, that has spawned some nicknames over the years, one of which is Triple, the other is D Cubed, and people in my firm also refer to me as the Traffic Dude at times. Next slide, please. So I tend to hopefully give you some insight as to how the warehousing industry has evolved over time from more traditional warehouses back when we were younger, or our parents and grandparents were younger, to what it means today. So if you look back in the 50s, a traditional warehouse would have had been commonly a multi-story building, have very low ceiling heights on each of the floors, little to no automation, largely driven by human labor, and would generate a high amount of truck traffic because a lot of the truckloads that would either originate from or be destined to traditional warehouses were partially filled. Next slide, please. And I tried to get some pictures and images of each of the things that I'm going to be discussing. So I did find this picture of an old Woolworth warehouse, and unfortunately, as we all know, Woolworth doesn't exist anymore. Next slide, please. And you see a lot of repurposed traditional warehouses where they were multi-story, and they've been converted to either office space or a residential space. The one on the top, if you look to the right, you can see there's an elevated concrete platform. I suspect that probably was the loading docks that served this building at some point when it was a warehouse operation. Next slide. So as Brian laid out, there's been a boom in warehouse development, particularly in our area, and most notably along the Turnpike in New Jersey and throughout the Lehigh Valley. Most of the warehouse that has been developed over the last 20 years, I would characterize as a high cube type warehousing product. They're generally one-story buildings. They have very high clear ceiling heights. They have a moderate amount of automation, relatively low employee counts, and a moderate amount of truck traffic. Next slide, please. And just grab the archival picture that we had of one of our projects. And if you have traveled the Turnpike or in the overall area, I think most, if not all of us, recognize this type of warehouse building. Usually at the corners, there's some higher end treatments and finishes for an office entrance, and then the rest of the building has your concrete panels, very indicative and representative of a modern high cube warehouse, which has dominated most of the warehousing construction in the last 20 years in our region. Next slide, please. And if you were to go into one of these warehouses and the tenant was operating in a way that is representative of a typical high cube warehouse tenant, this is essentially what you would see. Racking systems from floor to ceiling. That is why they have clear ceiling heights inside them, where you're inventorying product that will eventually be loaded onto trucks and delivered either to retailers or end customers. And I would ask you to just keep this image in your mind because I'm going to refer back to it later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So for those of you that are familiar with central New Jersey, this image is of two warehouses on the top part of the slide. The one on the left is Volkswagen Audi warehouse operation, and the one on the right is a Home Depot warehouse operation. They're in Cranberry. They're along Station Road and just east of Route 130. And they represent most of what's been built in the last 20 years. The one on the left, the Volkswagen building, is essentially a single loaded building. Most of the loading docks are on the north side of that building. They do have a few on the south side of the building, but not many. There's some trailer parking on the north side of the building as well. And then on the left side, so the west side of the Audi Volkswagen building is where the employee parking is. And you can see, at least at the time that aerial image was taken, there wasn't a lot of cars parked in the parking lot. On the right side, which is the Home Depot building, it's double loaded. So there's loading docks on both sides of the building. So it almost operates like a cross dock facility. There's a lot of trailer parking that surrounds all the loading docks. And then on the left side, the west side of that building is where the employee parking is. And that parking lot at the time this photo was taken is fairly full. We had the occasion to go out and do 24-hour counts at both of these buildings. And I'll just give you the results of the daily numbers that we collected. So the Volkswagen Audi building, the one on the left, the black roofed one, that's approximately 928,000 square feet. And it generated 250 cars in a 24-hour period and 90 trucks in a 24-hour period when we did our counts. The Home Depot building is smaller, it's 772,000 square feet. It generated 200 cars in a 24-hour period and 185 trucks in that same 24-hour period. So the Home Depot building is smaller, but generated almost twice the amount of trucks than the Audi building, and also had less cars. So the Home Depot building really is representative of a cross-dock operation where you are going to generate more trucks by virtue of the nature of your operation, whereas the Audi Volkswagen building is less active, particularly as it relates to generating truck traffic. Next slide, please. So because of my involvement with our friends out in Seattle, I've had a firsthand seat and a deep understanding of how, at least as it relates to them, they've evolved what a warehouse operation means in the context of controlling a logistics chain. So their goal is to completely control from the time somebody clicks an order online to when that item that they ordered hits their front door at their home or their business. And in doing that, they've created different types of warehouse operations, which one could argue whether some are warehousing or not, but we'll leave that for another day. They've created different types of warehouse operations that are the different puzzle pieces in that whole logistics chain that they seek to control. What I'm going to review with you is not an exhaustive list, by no means, of all the different facilities, but I believe it's representative of most of the facilities and operations that you would see. Brian is correct that Amazon's been taking down most of the square footage in the warehouse sector, not only in our area, but across the country. And I envision, as he alluded to, that there will be other retailers and operators that are emerging that are going to look to replicate that same level of control over their logistics chain. So I do envision more demand for a warehouse, or sustained demand for a warehouse, continuing at least for the next 5 to 10 years. And that other operators will have similar facilities to the ones that I'm going to go over with you right now. In terms of our friends at Seattle's logistics chain, they have receive centers, fulfillment centers, sortation centers, and then delivery stations, which are known as last mile facilities. So I'm going to go over each of those and then how they fit into that overall logistics chain. Next slide, please. So receive centers, and I'll give you an analogy. Some of you may have seen McLane, McClane trucks going up and down the New Jersey Turnpike. McLane is an operator that essentially has consolidated deliveries to convenience stores, as an example, Wawa or 7-Eleven. Whereas way back when, 20 years ago, a Wawa or 7-Eleven would have individual deliveries from your Coke distributor, your Pepsi person, your Frito-Lays, your dairy, your chips, and it would result in multiple deliveries occurring by different vendors every day at a convenience store. And the convenience store industry has moved away from that model, and they've consolidated their operations so that individual vendors and suppliers can deliver to a main operator like McLane, and then McLane will take all those individual items and make one truck delivery to a convenience store a day with multiple items. That's the same theory behind a receive center in the context of our friends out in Seattle, where vendors don't have to deliver their goods directly to fulfillment centers. They can deliver their goods to receive centers, and the receive centers will break down those large deliveries of individual vendor goods into smaller loads, then load those loads onto a truck with multiple goods on it, and then one truck can go to a fulfillment center, reducing the amount of truck traffic that happens around fulfillment centers. So receive center is generally a high cube warehouse, just like the ones I just discussed in Cranberry, the Volkswagen Audi, and the Home Depot. They are dual-sided loading, so they are a cross-dock operation where vendors come in with their goods on one side of the building. Those goods are offloaded, moved through the middle of the building, and then broken down into smaller shipments and loaded onto trucks that are destined to fulfillment centers. They generally operate with 2 shifts. Representative in terms of the amount of people, about 700 per shift, and they generate about 200 trucks a day. I don't have a picture for a receive center, but if you just envision a typical high cube warehouse building, that would essentially represent a receive center. Next slide, please. Once goods leave a receive center, they will make their way to a fulfillment center. So our friends out in Seattle, they have 2 types of fulfillment centers. They have non-sortable, which are items that are larger than 18 inches. So they're not easily sorted with other items to be put into a box to be delivered to your home. They occupy high cube warehouse type buildings. They're generally about 1 million square feet footprint. They're generally ground floor operation. They may have some mezzanine space, but not a lot. They run in 2 shifts, and there's about 700 per shift, and they generate about 200 trucks per day. Next slide, please. And it just so happens that we have a non-sortable fulfillment center right in Cranberry. So if you're ever traveling down New Jersey Turnpike in southbound direction, once you get south of 8A, you can see this Amazon fulfillment center from the Turnpike. And full disclosure, I did work on this one. And what you can see in terms of contrasting it with the Audi and the Home Depot buildings is down on the south side. So the bottom of this building is all employee parking. Car parking spaces is a little bit to the right as well of the building. Then at the top of the building are all the loading docks against the building, and then there's additional trailer spaces beyond that. So again, ground floor operation, about 1 million square feet. I would point out, and Brian alluded to this as well, there is definitely a container management problem right now at the ports, and tenants of warehouses are really driving, no pun intended, the need for trailer parking at their sites. because from what I understand, there's a penalty to return a trailer to a port when the port is not expecting that trailer to arrive. So trailer parking has become something that the industry is really requiring when potential tenants are looking for new deals. Next slide, please. So just the inside of a actual non-sortable fulfillment center. This one we worked on up in Massachusetts, and when I asked you to store away that image of a high cube warehouse inside image that I presented earlier, basically it's the same thing, where you have racking system full of inventory that is going to be picked and then placed into a box and put into the logistics chain to be delivered to your home or your business. Next slide, please. Just another example of what the inside would look like, where in the background you see the racking system full of goods, and in the foreground you see where those goods are being essentially put into boxes to be loaded onto trucks to get delivered. Next slide, please. So there's non-sortable fulfillment centers. So naturally you would ask, yep, is there a sortable fulfillment center? And the answer is yes. The sortable fulfillment centers handle items that are smaller than 18 inches, so they can be sorted with other items. So as an example, if you order some toothbrushes and batteries, those are small items that could be sorted and put into one box to come to your home. They are multi-story warehouse buildings. So there's a ground floor operation, and then there's multiple mezzanines that essentially go wall to wall, which drives the height of these buildings to over 100 feet tall. They do run in 2 shifts. Generally speaking, there is a high level of automation, but notwithstanding the fact that there is a high level of automation, they still are human labor intensive, about 1,000 people per shift, and they generate about 300 trucks a day. Next slide, please. Just an image looking outside of what one of these sortable fulfillment centers look like. This is an older generation one, so it's not quite 100 foot tall. I think the inside of this one only had 2 mezzanine levels, but more current and modern ones are pushing 4 and 5 mezzanine levels, driving up the building height. Next slide, please. And New Jersey is also lucky enough to have a sortable fulfillment center. This one's in the infamous Robbinsville, New Jersey. It was the first facility that was opened in New Jersey by our friends out in Seattle. That parking lot, so the car parking is on 3 sides of the building, the left side, the right side, and then the bottom side. That amounts to about 2,400 car parking spaces, give or take. On the north side of that building is the loading docks against the building, and then beyond that is trailer parking. If you have the occasion to come down County Route 539 through Robbinsville, you will be able to see this building. Next slide, please. And what's happening inside the sortable fulfillment center buildings up at the mezzanine levels is essentially what you see right here. There are these shelving systems, I call them baker's shelves, which are moved around by these robots, which are those little orange things. They look like Roomba units on the bottom of them. And then on the perimeter of the mezzanine levels are human stations where the humans will pick items out of the shelving systems that are brought over to them by the robots. They'll pick those items off the shelves, they'll put them into totes that are behind them, and then the totes go down to the ground floor where other humans will empty the totes and put the items in boxes for ultimate delivery to the customer. Next slide, please. So we've talked about receive center, which is happening before things get into a fulfillment center. We've talked about fulfillment centers where goods are actually warehoused and then picked and packed to be put into your box to eventually get to your home. A lot of the trucks that come out of fulfillment centers will go to sortation centers. Alternatively, they could go to third-party shippers like UPS or United States Parcel Service or FedEx, or directly to a delivery station. But a lot of those trucks loaded with customer packages will go to sortation centers. You may recall a few years ago, a lot of prime customers did not get their items in time for Christmas, and it was a big news story. And the reason that, as I understand it, that occurred is that a lot of the third-party shippers like the United States Postal Service and UPS were getting these truckloads of customer packages that were not sorted by zip code. So the third-party shippers had to sort the packages by zip code first before they could load it onto their vehicles, delivery vehicles, to then make deliveries to the end customer. And that created a delay, and therefore a lot of prime orders missed the mark in terms of arriving in time for Christmas. So the concept of a sortation center came into being to address that issue. So much like a receive center, they can occupy your typical high cube warehouse building. They are, again, a dual-sided loading operation, so a cross-dock operation. Trucks full of customer packages will emanate or originate from a fulfillment center. They'll come to the sortation center. The employees will unload those trucks of unsorted packages. They will sort those packages by zip code, and then they will load those sorted packages by zip code onto other trucks. And those trucks will leave to go to third-party shippers like UPS or FedEx, or directly to a delivery station. They run 4 shifts, so they're about 6-hour shifts. Human labor is about $250 per shift, and they generate about 250 trucks a day. Next slide, please. And we're at the final stop in that whole logistics chain in terms of when you order something to right before it gets to your house. And that is the delivery station. Friends at Seattle have been very active in building this component of their logistics chain recently. So you may have seen some delivery stations go up in your immediate area. They too can occupy a high cube warehouse. If it's a build to suit specifically for a delivery station, the building will not be as big as a typical high cube warehouse. It will be smaller. They have few loading docks, and the reason is they do not generate a lot of trucks each day. And you see at the bottom about 25 trucks per day. Their purpose is to deliver customer packages directly to the end customer. The human labor that is needed to run a delivery station is about 200 people over the course of an entire day inside the building over multiple shifts. And generally speaking, these generate about 250 delivery vans per day. So these are pretty compatible when you look at it from a traffic perspective. They generally don't start their van operation till 9 in the morning, so after the morning commute rush hour. And the vans themselves don't start coming back to the delivery station once they finish their routes till after 7 at night. So the majority of the activity of these types of facilities really occurs late morning when delivery vans are leaving and they've missed the rush hour. So from a traffic perspective, they're a pretty compatible land use and really could be located anywhere with not a lot of issue. Next slide, please. And I was hard pressed to really find a good image of a delivery station, but I did happen to find this one. It's in mid-construction, but it still portrays the components of a typical delivery station site. So if you look to the right of the building's the white roof building, which has all the HVAC stuff on top of it. And then to the south of the building, there's a canopy, that solid white rectangle. Under that canopy is where the delivery vans load their packages. So delivery van drivers will drive their vans under that canopy, and they'll run into the building, and they will get these baker shells full of bags with their packages for their routes, that then they put those bags in their vans and load up their vans and then leave for the day. To the upper right hand corner is the associate parking. So that's the parking lot for the people that will be working inside the delivery station building. On the left side of the delivery station building is the loading dock area, and you can see it's not a very large loading dock operation, again, because they generally do not generate a lot of truck traffic. And then the asphalt parking to the right of the canopy area, and then all of the unfinished parking directly south of the canopy area, that's all van parking for the delivery station. So the way it works is a van driver will come in with their personal vehicle, they'll park, they'll get into their assigned van, they'll make their way over to the loading area and load up, and then they leave for the entire day, and they don't come back until their route is finished. And that is the last step of the logistics process, at least as it relates to our friends out in Seattle. And with that, I've concluded my presentation and look forward to any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Dan. And if we can ask Brian, if you can come back on and turn on your camera. We'll start with a couple of questions that have been added to the chat box. And in the meantime, as I ask those, audience, if you'd like to add some questions to it, just waiting for Brian to join us, but as he comes back online, there he is. First, let's talk about, Brian, the question had come up about the amount of warehousing being developed and how, what that trend has been. Has all the new development been occurring just recently or over the last several years in a kind of continuous pattern?
It's been a continuous pattern for, believe it or not, 10 years, and the question always been, what inning are we in? What inning are we in? And then when COVID hit, people thought, okay, well, maybe that'll put a stop to it momentarily, which it did only from a kind of a physical point of view, but from a demand point of view, it actually ramped it up. We saw the compression of what we'd call e-commerce growth that we expected to see over 5 years compressed into an 18-month period of time. So I think, it's been slow and steady. From a selfish point of view, from as a developer, we'd rather honestly see slow and steady than peaks and valleys. And typically in our industry and in development, you do have that, the peaks and valleys. In past cycles, you'd have, demand ramping up, and then supply would move to meet that demand and then overshoot the demand, which then would, create that natural correction of increasing vacancy rates and lowering rents. That just hasn't happened. It's just really been slow and steady. There has certainly been I would say, I'll call it an escalation, but a high ramp up in rents, and then they plateaued, and now we think they're ramping up again and going to reach the next plateau level. But long answer to short question, but No, it's not been the past 2 years, 3 years. It's been consistently for the past 10 years. Both along the Turnpike Corridor as well as out west to Pennsylvania.
And I have to go back to your comment about a triple net of $20+ in the Meadowlands. And I see Dan shaking his head as well, because, after the Great Recession, we're talking under $3 a square foot triple net down at 8A. So how sustainable are lease rates like that? Is that leading to a diversification, maybe the kind of delivery stations or smaller footprint that Dan's talking about? Is it pushing the warehousing further out? Are we just about to see the bubble burst? What's going on there? Because wow, those are near retail and office numbers.
Right. So it's a great question, and I don't have the exact answer. It's a question we ask ourselves all the time. A couple qualifiers there. That reported rent is at a premier location that has what we'll call some billboard advantages to it. It's in a highly visible location. So any building signage, would be great. Call it billboard opportunity for a user there. But it's in close proximity to the Lincoln Tunnel, so the tenant's able to make a lot of truck turns to go in and out of the city and service that market as effectively as if they were across the river and they'd be paying twice as much in rent. So are there 10 tenants willing to pay that number? No. And one deal doesn't make a market, as we say. But that said, those rents are also a function of where land prices are trading. There are land deals pending in the mid 200 per square foot under the building cost, approaching $300 per square foot under the building. When you have that type of high cost of land acquisition, you're going to need high rents unless someone's willing to build, on a speculative basis to a 3 or 4% return. And right now people are building to 5% because you've got an exit cap rate in some cases at a 3% level or a 3.5%. So you still have an adequate spread there from the development yield. But that's partly what's driving the rents is the high barriers to entry, creating very high cost land with a lot of capital chasing the limited supply of land. And yet then your ultimate question is the right one is, are there tenants that are going to be willing to continue to pay that type of rent? And the answer is not everyone. Certainly the legacy, what I'll call manufacturing or even bulk warehouse operators, they may not be able to. They don't take advantage of the high cube, so they're not picking up the same efficiency. So they're not the ones that'll be willing to pay that high rent. It will be more likely the ones that are taking full advantage with very narrow aisles of that full height with automated storage and retrieval systems, maximizing all the pallet positions, and then factoring that, as I said, those truck turns and delivery to their ultimate customer as part of that equation as to what they can ultimately afford to pay for that land. The challenge is going to be that there are some legacy tenants that need to be in this region that get their commodities, raw commodities out of the port, and their customer base is in the New York metro area. So one in particular, he's a that I met with. He's a cardboard. He's a box manufacturer. He can't move out of Northeast for that reason. He's like, I can't move to the Carolinas. I have to be here, But he doesn't know how he's going to solve his real estate needs, quite frankly, because of those dynamics.
Thank you. Dan, a couple of questions have emerged on here. One from Tom Drabeck is thinking about those delivery stations. Are there a way of converting empty big box retail into those?
Absolutely. I've seen them do old Sam's Clubs rather easily. Nothing that I'm aware of right now in New Jersey, but certainly outside of New Jersey, I've seen them do that on a few occasions. And they also will take a speculative warehouse that is available and they will do a lot of the van loading inside the warehouse because they don't need the entire footprint for their sorting operation. So they will incorporate actually van parking and van loading inside a building that's too big for their operation. And they just did that. There's a warehouse building. I forget who the developer is, but it's right on 295 in Lawrenceville, and they got a speculative warehouse approval from Lawrenceville, and Amazon went in there and got an amended approval, which I was involved in, and now it's a delivery station operation.
And what's the general size of a delivery station?
They vary. It depends on what the market need is and what's available. They can be as small as 100,000 square foot buildings with a lot of exterior parking all the way up to 200,000 square foot buildings. And they will retrofit existing buildings if those buildings are in a location that they absolutely need to be in.
And a question that came up was also on the trailer parking and how that relates to port traffic. I mean, there is an effort by the ports to get the containers off as quickly as possible, but also a lot of stuff coming in at the moment. So can you talk a little bit about the relationship about that the trailer parking need and the international containers?
So I'll defer to Brian as well to opine on that. But my experience as of late is that trailer parking is in high demand. And if you have a single loaded building with no trailer parking, you're going to be hard pressed to find a tenant that wants to rent that space because the trailer management issue is becoming a really big one. But I'll let Brian expand upon that.
I would agree, and that said, single loaded buildings still do lease. There's a foot for every shoe, so to speak. But as a general course, the parking demands are higher than ever, especially when it comes to some of those consolidation centers that were reviewed. We're working on one out in Pennsylvania. By way of example, it's a 1.2 million square foot site. That we could have put a 1.2 million square foot building. In other words, we are doing a 400,000 square foot build to suit, and the other 800,000 square feet of area is being used for parking fields. So it just kind of gives you one extreme example.
Is that trailer parking, Brian, or a combination car and trailer?
It's primarily trailer. The car parking lot is a small portion of that overall site.
And is that trailer parking going to be exclusively used by the tenant, or are they renting it out to other users?
Exclusively for the tenant. It's an automated sort facility, so therefore that's why you have a little bit lower car parking count than say the one you noted down in Robbinsville. So in Robbinsville, obviously that's a fulfillment center. This is a sort center, so it's what I would describe as a hybrid between a truck transfer and a DC. So it's not as narrow as a truck transfer, but not as wide as a traditional DC, and not the size of a traditional DC in that 400,000 square foot range. But dock doors on either side, and effectively it'll be two-touch operation. The product will be handled by people coming off the trailer on one end, sorted through the facility, and then restacked into another truck on the other side. And we're seeing a lot of that. They're basically two-touch facilities, whether it be this tenant that I'm referring to or a FedEx sort facility. We're also just completing one of those. It's not dissimilar. It's not quite as heavy as parking. That's a just under 1 million square foot facility, and they have about an additional 400,000 square feet of trailer parking for that FedEx sort facility. That's out in Newville, Pennsylvania, west of Carlisle.
To be clear, we're talking about trailer drop-off and pickup. There is not truck parking per se for the power unit or for the driver at these facilities, correct?
Correct. Just trailer drops.
Okay. And is the assumption basically with most of these facilities that in terms of the trailer pickup or drop off, there are appointment systems that the drivers need to meet?
Yes. And there's a long, and that said, there's still a long queue line at the security. The security guardhouse is pushed pretty far into the site, so there's a big truck queue line that gets the trucks off the local roads and they queue them up on site before the guardhouse. But yeah, they have to by appointment and checked in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike McGinnis does point out a note about labor availability. And with all these locations, and Dan, you touched about associate parking, but he asked the question, how is labor availability, construction, and more importantly, non-construction impacting industrial real estate as it relates to growth in warehouse inventory, site selection, development patterns?
I'll talk to that one briefly and then hand it off to my Langen colleague. For that sort facility that I just described, the 400,000 square footer, top of its list was labor. So that tenant is most of these tenants are very scientific in how they approach their site selection. We provide labor analytics for a particular site. It's what we study before we acquire a site. Is we make sure that there's labor availability in that market. So in Pennsylvania, you've got really Allentown, Harrisburg, and Scranton, and Reading being the four top labor-centric supply areas. So a lot of facilities have gravitated towards those labor supply areas, but it is at the top of the list. And then construction availability is also critical. There is adequate labor right now for construction. It's right what we're experiencing more than anything is supply chain disruption as it relates to materials, not so much labor, but construction labor and warehouse labor still very much high in demand.
Thank you, Brian. Dan, a question on some of the truck numbers and so forth. Are most of these buildings you're talking about, and we're talking about like the non-sort fulfillment, the sort fulfillment, and I think sortation, are those most related to 1 million square feet, or in terms of those truck traffic numbers, what's the typical square foot building associated with those?
And that's a good question, and I neglected to really point out in my presentation, not everything that you see in terms of the e-commerce warehouse evolution can fit into set parameters like we've all been accustomed to. ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, they're the ones that basically are responsible for putting out trip rates to estimate how much traffic generation various land uses will generate. And oftentimes those set numbers don't necessarily apply to the operation that is being proposed. So as an example, a sortable warehouse or a sortable fulfillment center can have a footprint of around 800,000 square feet, but it's got 4 or 5 mezzanine levels inside. So its overall square footage could approach north of 3 million. But not all the 3 million feet are occupied by human labor. Most of the mezzanine levels are robots pushing around shelving systems. A non-sortable fulfillment center, that's about 1 million square foot, but that's only a ground floor operation, has very little, if any, mezzanine area. And then the sortation operation, as Brian alluded to, on the order of about 400,000 square feet. So the tried and true, if we have a 1 million square foot warehouse, it's going to generate this much traffic. That doesn't necessarily apply unless you have a typical high cube warehouse tenant with that type of operation. So it's very important, in my opinion, and the audience is composed mostly of public sector people on this session. I think when you're reviewing an application, or if you're involved in an application for a warehouse development, if there's a potential tenant in mind, you really need to drill down more deeply into what the specific operation of that tenant is likely to be, to have a better understanding of what a traffic profile would be throughout the course of a day so that you could better understand what traffic impacts there may be.
Thank you, Dan. I see more questions piling in, and I think I'm going to send some of these to you afterwards, but I do want to ask both of you one last question before we move on. And basically looking at industrial real estate trends, what trend or issue or consideration is most keeping you up at night? I'll start with Brian, then go to Dan.
Land availability is certainly a concern. You know, there is someone once said that New Jersey might be the first state in the union to actually run out of land, developable land when you overlay the highlands and restrictions and whatnot. Although I say that, and yet it seems like tomorrow somebody comes up with the ability to repurpose another site, in terms of a brownfield, or we're just pushing out into other corridors. Like right now, the Route corridor is not historically had a lot of modern day product developed, and there's now a focus along that 80 corridor. Um, so land availability in order to continue to meet supply concerns me. I would tell you the other thing that concerns me selfishly as a developer is the high level of regulations and the lengthy approval process. It makes things very difficult.
Thank you, Brian. We're looking to see who we can mute right now to reduce our background noise.
Yeah, that's not my opera in my office. Sorry.
And Dan, so what keeps you up at night with this?
Brian hit it right on the head. It's particularly in New Jersey, it's a regulatory environment, right? I'm an engineering consultant charged with pulling permits and approvals. And when you have a client that has executed a lease with an end tenant with a date certain that they got to get in that building and get open by that date certain, and you're charged with trying to navigate the very complex and often lengthy approval and permitting process in New Jersey, that's what keeps me up at night. And I always tell everyone, particularly out-of-state developers that come into New Jersey, they're in for a rude awakening because they're used to doing development work outside of this area of the country, and the regulatory environment is a lot more favorable and a lot less lengthy. So I've told everybody that has ever asked me, New Jersey is very good at legislating land use development to our sister states. And you're seeing that in Pennsylvania, you're seeing that in Delaware.
That's
And
true.
if the regulatory environment was a little more favorable and a lot less lengthy, I think we would see more of that land development occurring within our state and benefiting from it. So that's what keeps me up at
Yeah,
night.
I'll add on to that. I will tell you right now, from my perspective, I would say there is no such thing as an as of right site. Even if the zoning is there, there are no approvals that are certain. And quite frankly, I've had certain municipalities as much say, I know it's an allowed use, I know we should approve it, but my constituents will vote me out of office, so you're gonna just have to sue us. And nobody will ever say that on the record, but unfortunately, those discussions do occur.
And I'll leave you with this thought, Ann. I've seen really good projects denied, and I've seen really bad ones approved for the same reason, politics. And our home rule structure in our state creates that kind of environment that Brian just said.
But I would not necessarily be in favor, or certainly am not in favor of some proposed legislation that would create oversight boards or allow neighboring towns to, effectively um, veto, project, within its area, or create another level of. Last thing we need are more layers of regulations for approvals.
Completely agree.
I think if you're gonna move to a model, then take away the home rule and create regional oversight like other states. But to have home rule and then lay on top of that, home rule on top of home rule, and then another regional layer on top of that, and then another recourse would be at the state level. We might as well, like Dan said, you might as well just tell everybody to start packing up for Delaware or Pennsylvania or the Carolinas, because we won't be able to timely supply um, product to meet the demands of our customers.
I think that's well said, Brian.
Brian and Dan, I want to thank you so very much for joining us, and a lot of food for thought. I do ask people, if we didn't get to your questions, we will forward them to Brian and Dan after this. And again, their presentations will be available after this workshop concludes. So again, thank you, Brian and Dan.
Our pleasure.
If
Thank you.
if we can go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to go on to a series of tools that have been developed. And we're going to go through these fairly rapidly. And we're going to have a few minutes after each presentation for Q&A. So let me just go through quickly who we're going to hear from, and then we're going to get going. Becky Bradley from Lehigh Valley on guidance they've developed on HighCube and automated warehousing. And again, we do have the bios for all of our speakers that we will be posting. After Becky concludes and we do a Q&A, we'll go to Mike Ruane from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Authority, and then to Njtpa for two of the tools that we have on our website. So with that, Becky, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anne, and it was wonderful to hear from the previous speakers as well. So the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, Lehigh Valley Transportation Study is actually a two-part agency. We are the official county planning agency for Northampton and Lehigh counties in eastern Pennsylvania, known as obviously the Lehigh Valley. So we have some review authority and some advisory authority on all land development and track that very closely. And then provide a lot of services and guidance to our local governments, which the HighCube and automated warehouse guide is something you'll hear about in a minute. Our second role is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, again, for the Lehigh Valley. So we manage the transportation planning and investment structure. So that two-part role gives us some interesting insight into what's actually going on, because we get the luxury of monitoring and even to some extent managing land development. So in the next slide, LVPC has drafted community guides over the years, primarily targeted towards informing local governments, and we have 62 municipalities in the Lehigh Valley on a variety of topics, from street connectivity to inclusionary zoning. And these guides are really designed to provide information that supports municipalities as they navigate new and evolving development types, and ultimately how different land uses can most effectively support the goals, policies, and actions of their community, but also future LV, our regional plan, which, by the way, in 2019, we combined the county general land use plan, or bi-county general land use plan, with our long-range transportation plan to make a seamless investment plan that's then tied to a balanced strategy for growth, responsible management, development, redevelopment, and preservation of the region. So really, it started back at the early portion of the pandemic in March, April timeframe, where we started to see real conversations about an emerging land use related to some of the industrial proposals we were seeing on the county planning side. And then we started working again on a model ordinance, essentially, and guidance document that would help our communities navigate this emerging issue quickly. And so in the next slide, really over last summer, and then it's really been evolving, we developed a community guide on HighCube and or automated warehousing. And we've kept it up to date. And we keep doing updates, and in a few more slides, we'll have the link on the website to that, including links to presentations where we've talked about specific portions of it. But really, it came out of 3 proposals. The first one was a zoning amendment in Upper Macungie Township, which is our largest industrial development area in the Lehigh Valley and is a very significant manufacturing location. But, you know, as with any manufacturing district, you also have the logistics portion of that as well. And that was for the redevelopment of an existing cold storage warehouse into a 140-foot tall facility. Ultimately, it went to court. It started with a proposal for a zoning variance and then a zoning amendment. And ultimately, the Lehigh County courts found that that was not a good use at that scale at that site. Meanwhile, we were also seeing a proposal for Geodis, which is a distributor of Apple products, iPhones, laptops, that sort of thing, that was being put together by Rockefeller Industrial Development north of Lehigh Valley International Airport. That one is only about a 50-foot tall proposal, so not quite high cube, but highly automated. So it fit in that automated category, and it would have a different and has a different transportation profile than, let's say, something that would have been much larger in another location. And then CBRE, in partnership with a local developer, is working on a industrial development right on the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey, I-80 connection at the Delaware River Joint Toll Bridge Commission Bridge in Portland. And it's actually in Upper Mount Bethel Township. They're billing it as the largest industrial development in the East. As part of that, the developer approached the Upper Mount Bethel Township for a series of ordinance amendments that would allow a high cube development across that entire site. So we could have as many as 10 buildings that could be high cube and or automated. So in the next slide, we started looking at, well, what the heck does this mean? And what is that going to mean for our communities? What do they need to start looking into? What can they expect to be prepared to see? So as noted by the previous speakers, we've been seeing tremendous industrial growth over the last several years, really varying in a very intense way over the last 6 years. And it seems like every year it only gets more and more intense. And that's obviously due to our geography and our location that's easily accessible between, the New York Metro, the Philly Metro, other parts of the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and then obviously out to points west. And the freight industry itself has been obviously evolving rapidly to make itself more efficient and keep up with consumer demands. We definitely saw that during the pandemic. So just by way of context, between 2015 and the end of 2020, so the end of last year, we're in the middle of the pandemic at that point, Lehigh Valley municipalities, so just Lehigh and Northampton counties in Pennsylvania, approved nearly 27 million square feet with another 10.3 million square feet in planning. That was just over that 5-year period between 2015 and 2020. That was, again, by the end of 2020. So from January to August of this year, so 2021, we've seen another 8,895,279 million square feet. So another 8.89 million square feet just between January and the end of August. So we're seeing proposals of around 1 million square feet plus per month. And we're now starting to see them as far as 6 miles away from the nearest highway, which creates some unique challenges. So we do expect then that there's going to be more of an appetite for high cube and or automated warehouses emerging. So the previous speakers talked a little bit about what that would mean and how those could be differentiated from traditional warehouses because of their height. Again, we've had ones proposed as high as 100 and 80 feet here, and their integrated automated technologies are definitely going to have an effect, whether it's now because of the declining amount of land available for industrial development, or because people want to be closer to the highway network, and being off 6 miles off on a 2-lane road with weight restricted bridges is not really optimal for either an industrial developer or the end user. So we do expect there to be a significant growth in this type of product. So in the next slide, here's just some examples from around the country that give you an indication of how these facilities look and how they work. I think down it'll be in the bottom left-hand corner. The Americold facility in Rochelle, Illinois, is fully automated with automated storage and retrieval systems. And why this construction image is so important on the net effect of high cube and or automated warehouses is the fact that the actual structure of the automation is the structure of the building, and then it's sort of wrapped with the skin, which is very different than the traditional construction of a warehouse that you typically see. And so these obviously tend not to be built on speculation, where a lot of traditional warehouses, actually almost all of our traditional warehouses, are built on spec and then obviously leased up very quickly when they're nearing the end of their construction. But they can look like traditional warehouses at the end of the day. And you see that completed one in Rochelle, Illinois, over in the bottom right-hand side. But you see things like in Seattle, Washington, the Prologis Georgetown Crossings warehouse that even has like a highway-style ramp up to the upper levels of this kind of warehouse on top of a warehouse product, which is essentially what the high cube warehouse is. So if you're really looking at it in context, these things, can be very successful. They can also be detrimental to a community. So balancing out the location of those, what they mean, what their traffic profile is going to be, what their shift timing is, can we get transit to the site? All of those things are things that we think about along with our local governments when developments come in. And so in the next slide, I'm going to show you a little bit of what's in the high cube and automated warehouse community guide, is we just did some really simple, really quick graphics that illustrate the difference between these types of products. And the 3D graphic there kind of shows that the same volume of warehousing space allocated in a high cube versus a traditional warehouse. So the traditional warehouse in this setting is 200,000 square feet facility built over 4.6 acres of land with a 24-foot ceiling height. So that's really some of our older product. I mean, we rarely see a warehouse under 400,000 square feet these days, and most of them are in the 40 to 60-foot height. But if you've got an existing warehouse, and I'll get to why that's important in the next slide, but these building dimensions in a traditional warehouse yield a volume really of about 4 million cubic square feet. So to handle the same 4.8 million cubic volume, the footprint of a 100-foot tall, or roughly the size of a 10-story building, a high cube warehouse, which would need just more than 1 acre of land. So you're seeing the amount of land needed for these facilities be reduced fairly considerably from around 4.6 acres to 1 acre of land. So there can be some real benefits to these, especially as land becomes more scarce. In the next slide, in the guide, we talk about that there's some things that people could really could have some positive benefits with these high cube and or automated warehouses, and then there could possibly be some negative outcomes. And that talking through those with the development community as these proposals come in is really, really important. So right now we have a massive labor shortage. Who doesn't, right? But it's really poignant here in the Lehigh Valley, where we've had such rapid growth in not only population, but we've had rapid growth, especially in the industrial sector. So right now, the fewer jobs might not necessarily be a big issue, but in the future, it very well may be, especially as those more traditional products are automated or retrofitted to be automated. So, there are some real opportunities here and some real challenges, as you could see on the slide. So in the guidance document, we really summarize the impacts. And again, vertical height could mean less land area, as I mentioned in the previous slide, though the increase in the scale is a challenge for certain communities, especially in a suburban condition where maybe they don't have they're relying on a volunteer fire department, they don't have a ladder truck. I mean, there can be some really serious concerns with emergency management associated with these. But if you're putting them in a community where you do have a paid fire department, you do have adequate emergency services, you do have the equipment, you do have sewer and water and other things that really support the scale of this type of development, good highway access or local road access to the highway system, they can actually be beneficial in ways that maybe a more traditional product would not be. So then in the next slide, we did a couple of renderings to talk to our communities, because again, you could have a new construction situation, you could have redevelopment where you have a traditional warehouse and then someone wants to put a high cube product attached to that traditional warehouse. That's a very, obvious way to add more productivity out of an existing industrial property. And then we've seen this actually really frequently beyond just those three examples that emerged last year with ordinances and actual land development. But really for the last, 6 or 7 years, we've seen a lot of existing buildings be retrofitted internally for automated operations. So maybe they're not going up in a high cube setting, but they're definitely being automated, and that will change the transportation profile, could change the workforce profile of a facility fairly quickly. So what does that mean? So we created kind of some comparison graphics. On the right-hand side, you're like, what are those smokestacks? Well, that's the steel stacks from the former Bethlehem Steel site. It's now an industrial archaeological artistic element in our community. It's lit up and it's beautiful, and we have a High Line trail that goes right along it, and so it's really been developed, but it's about 230 feet tall. And so, comparing to that 140-foot proposal from the Americold facility out in Upper Macungie Township, you see that, the context and the location is important, but by way of comparison, it's much, much shorter. So then in the next slide, in the last slide here, we talk a little bit about like, hey, Dorney Park, the tall skyscraper there, it's about 135 feet tall. So by way of comparison to that 140-foot building, what might that look like in a suburban context? So really what we're getting at is there's a variety of regulations that come into play under Pennsylvania law for our local governments. And really that was the point of our guide, is to let them know, what tools are in the toolbox and how they need to be reviewed to make sure that everything's done within the confines of the law here. So really that top kind of chart outlines that. And I know we've got a multi-state audience on here, so I'm not sure how much you want to know about Pennsylvania land use law. But if you've got new construction, you're going to have to go through zoning, subdivision, land development, and the building code process. If it's a redevelopment, you may or may not need zoning depending on what's going on inside the facility. And what sort of additions or changes to the building, to the lot itself that you're making. It would only be a subdivision and a land development in Pennsylvania if that redevelopment is over 50% or more of the existing building or property, and everything's going to need building codes, especially for life safety. We have statewide building codes in Pennsylvania, and so you're definitely going to need structural review, you're going to need life safety review. And then if it's a retrofit, you're probably not making any changes to the site or the building itself. It's unlikely you're going to need zoning. It's unlikely you're going to need subdivision and land development. If you wouldn't, actually, it would throw it into a redevelopment category if you did. And again, you'll need building codes. So we wanted to make sure that we were informing the local government. So as these started to really become common in the Lehigh Valley, that they would be able to manage these as a measure of their local planning and be able to really think about these things in context of their community and where these may work and where they may not work. Because the worst thing you can have happen is for somebody to come in, propose something, the community say, yep, this is great, let's go, and then it get built and it fail. Because that actually is bad for the person investing in that site just as much as it's bad for the community and its long-term economic health. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that where new development is going, where redevelopment is happening, where retrofit is happening, that we have that balanced approach and that it can be supported in a positive way. So again, vast majority of our role is making sure that our local governments have the tools, that they're thinking about these things from a very practical perspective, looking at things through a neutral lens so they can make the best decisions on behalf of their community and especially the public health, safety, and welfare. So that's really what we aim to do with these guides. And if anybody's interested, check out our website at lvpc.org. We have some training recorded there. We've got a copy of the guide. We're doing more on freight in general. But again, we're seeing over 1 million square foot a month at this point. We're old hat at the development review process at this point, for better or worse. And so, it's something we're used to dealing with. And so if there's general comments or questions related to freight, land use and development, especially when it comes to local government, county government, and regional transportation planning, I'm happy to answer those. Thank you.
Becky, we have time for two somewhat quick questions. One from Mike McGinnis on whether you have the kind of home rule that you heard described for New Jersey. And then from Allison Conway on the typical length of a lease, or whether you're even told the length of a lease when someone's building a building.
Okay, so Mike's question is a good one. Yes, we are a home rule state. You guys in New Jersey in particular have a different way of interpreting that than we do in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth, everyone is home rule, yet it is in general a right to develop state. And it's done through a series of tools that local governments adopt. It all starts with their comprehensive plan or their multi-municipal comprehensive plan and its consistency with ours at the county level. Again, we're largely advisors to our local governments, though we do have 4 where we're actually their municipal planner as well, because they've chosen to use the County Planning Commission as that. But at the end of the day, then once you have that comprehensive plan, then your local governments base their zoning off of that, and then their subdivision and land development ordinance. So there's a consistency and a back and forth in the process. So at the end of the day, you're going to know whether your development is good to go on at least any zoning related matters within 30 days. That's what our review timeline is. And on the land development side, you're really going to know within 3 months, and you tend not to go to the land development side until you've gone through the zoning side. So that's how we're able to, I think as Brian had mentioned in a previous presentation, have 20 million new square feet online within 5 years, and over 15 million in the planning pipeline or construction pipeline today. And then Allison's question on the sense of a typical length of a lease. Right now, it's about 7 years. And again, on the traditional warehouse product, which is the majority of the new development that we see, is speculation. So we don't even know who the end user is as it's going through the land development process. As you can imagine, that creates tremendous challenges related to land to service. And, if it's e-commerce user, they're gonna need more employees or tend to have higher employee profile, though that's starting to change as well. How do we get, people to jobs? How do we get, truck routes set up, and it's a real challenge. A lot of it's actually happening after the development goes in, which I will tell you is a terrible situation. But given the way that Pennsylvania land use law is written, it is what it is. And that gets back to, I think, to probably where you're going with that question as well. Your length of a lease is 7-8 years long. That user that you have in there now may not be the same user that you have in under a decade. Well, that has a whole different profile potential, from transportation to tax rateables and receipts. And that affects then what local governments can do, the state government can do, county government can do in terms of investment in the transportation system or other things. So do I think that this is really sustainable? No, I don't. And I think that that's going to be a massive issue. And as we kind of make our way through the wild west of industrial growth, which is really what we're seeing right now, it's going to come with some challenges. And I do expect that we're going to have some, hiccups and some potentially major facility failures. And from what I mean by that is we'll see some vacancies in some locations here and there, though I don't think it will be perpetual or long term. But we are going to see some hiccups because it's just happening too fast, and in a really odd sort of way with a potential high turnover.
Becky, thank you so very much. Again, if additional questions come up, we will pass them on to you. At this point, we're going to turn it over to Mike Ruane. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Ann. And I'll get started while Jacob pulls up the presentation. I want to thank you, Ann, for inviting me today. Jacob, you can go to the next slide. I'm with the Office of Freight and Aviation Planning at DVRPC. We're the MPO for Philadelphia, which we sit just beyond the boundaries of the map forum, but obviously have a lot of crossover and interest in a lot of the subjects that get covered, especially freight. I'm going to go kind of quickly through our Philly Freight Finder tool today, and then our freight centers analysis and how we're leveraging that for planning for industrial development in our region. Next slide. As kind of background on our work, we're really focused on promoting freight and aviation as a core consideration in planning work. And we really focused on doing that through improving the visibility and availability of data. In a big way, it's creating information to educate our planners and decision makers, ultimately to inform our transportation and infrastructure investment decisions. Next slide. Philly Freight Finder really grew out of those core focus areas and our goals. It was greatly supported by our Freight Advisory Committee, and really was a way for us to provide comprehensive data about the freight system to the public and to decision makers. A lot of that data that's been maintained or developed over 20 plus years. And Philly Freight Finder, I'll say, is more than just the interactive platform that I'm going to share with you. It's also a robust data management and analysis program that we maintain year in and year out as we track different trends and activity in the region. So I'll briefly or quickly, I'll say, go through a demo of the tool. It's going to fly by at times. I apologize for that, but in the interest of time, I wanted to make sure we didn't linger too long on it. So Jacob, next slide. So the web interface is really targeted at our county planners and some of the public sector folks to help them understand what is going on and what freight looks like in their area of interest. So this is an example of Delaware County highlighting some of their network statistics and facilities in their area of interest. We've worked to incorporate trade data. I think it's good to help counties get a sense of what type of commodities and modes. You can think of this as kind of like the freight profile for a county. But the tool also has a focus on some of the detailed facilities that really make up the network, and that's the kind of the map tool. We've been maintaining updated capacity and activity data for different types of facilities to really help local communities understand the attributes of their specific freight infrastructure. What's up right now is just a single freight center, and I wanted to focus on freight centers today because that's really where we kind of tie our freight generating land uses to our transportation work, and they've become an essential tool for us as we track industrial real estate development regionally and approach planning efforts around that. Next slide. So Julie Freight Finder, we launched a tool to really explain how we define freight centers and what our analysis incorporated. This is going to fly by. I would encourage you to go to the website and check it out for more detail. But really, we're looking at freight intensive industries that generate larger activity, and then helping explain why these key employment industry subsectors were important to our region. Of course, we did a spatial analysis to identify where these different types of freight generating activities occur, and really nailed down to a few select, I'll say a few, it's about 70 freight centers regionally where we're seeing the majority of activity. We've developed typologies for each of these freight centers, and they're intended to help us explain to planners what type of activity is at that specific location, the type of buildings, the type of employment, also the supporting infrastructure needs that we might expect, and the kind of community impacts that occur at different types. Each typology has kind of unique characteristics in that regard. So these freight centers have become a core tool for us as we work with planners. Next slide. And decision makers in our region. For planning purposes, you know, we're leveraging these as we kind of plan for transportation and workforce access. So defining what investments benefit a freight center or the freight economy that becomes part of our LRP process and our TIP process. You know, we can use the freight typologies to better understand potential community impacts, and that focuses our engagement in certain areas of the region and with certain communities. Additionally, the growth tracking and understanding how, you know, these new forces that we've been hearing about all day. I will say our region has been a little bit behind on the new growth in industrial development, as you saw earlier from Brian, but there has been a lot of growth in the areas where our freight centers are, and being able to track that and find out if there's new areas of growth or expansion of freight centers is critical for us as we continue to address the transportation impacts and workforce impacts of these new developments. Next slide. The kind of the core focus of my office's work as it relates to freight centers and transportation access is really around truck access. That's where, you know, that's where we see the most conflict with our other road users and with communities. It's the thing that gives me the most phone calls from community members and public planners. So as a part of our ongoing efforts around freight centers, we're working to identify those facilities that support truck access into and out of freight centers, recognizing that these are the areas where we expect more growth in industrial development. And I think one of the things that we've really emphasized to folks is that, especially in some of these infill developments, and I'll talk about why we're seeing more of that, but more and more the infill development is occurring in communities that have older industrial footprints. But a failure for us to incorporate the considerations around trucks not only impacts the performance of the network for trucks and the opportunities for development, but it can have substantial safety and quality of life impacts for all of the road users in those communities. Next slide. The kind of the output from some of that work has been we've been developing a truck route designation framework and guide, trying to link complete streets planning and truck route planning. This is just an example of a draft example of how we can link the truck route typologies to to the complete streets typologies and then really emphasize different types of components and how they get treated. Next. The local industrial trends I won't linger on. I think, Brian covered that really well, but it has been a shift recently as we've seen some newer development occurring, most of it at freight centers. Next slide. The big shift has been as we've seen the market pressures increase to our north, and as developable land has not really become too limited, but as prices have elevated, we have seen more infill and redevelopment, and that is also, reuse of existing structures and communities, and we've found a need to address that. I'd also say, we're facing 2 developments with 15 million square foot proposed in each of them, one in Philadelphia, just beyond Center City, Philadelphia. So we've really had more demand from our partners to better understand what the implications of this development is. And I think some of what was covered today is very helpful and useful as we continue to engage with those partners. Next slide. So just as we are working through our current fiscal year planning work, we are actually working to create a guide that looks at some of the land development implications, transportation impacts, and the forces behind them. I think, Tom's questions in the chat box earlier were really interesting. That's part of what we're starting to address, and that's like answer questions from municipalities that don't fully understand what these developments are and how it relates to traditional ITE definitions of warehousing, and hopefully give them better resources as they address the growth in this type of development. And that's all for me.
Mike, thanks so much. We really appreciate everyone sticking with us. We're running just a few minutes late. We're not going to be able to ask Mike questions, but please, if you post them in the chat box, we'll get them to him and continue. And with that, I'm turning it over to Gabby, and thank you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning still. My name is Gabrielle Fossil, and I'm a principal planner of GIS and planning tools at Njtpa. I'm going to present the updated Freight Activity Locator Hub. Next slide. For those that don't know, we developed an application a couple of years ago that dealt strictly with freight data in the Njtpa region. The Freight Activity Locator was originally developed using one of Esri's configurable web apps. Once we started using the Arcgis Hub platform, we decided to transition the application into a Hub initiative site. The Arcgis Hub is part of the Esri platform that promotes collaboration and public engagement by bringing data and concerned constituents together to build an informed, connected, and engaged community. Migrating the application to the Arcgis Hub platform enabled new functionality and created a more user-friendly interface. The updated application seamlessly integrates both dynamic and static content using maps, dashboards, web applications, and more. Next slide. One new functionality of the Freight Activity Locator Hub is the ability to follow the initiative. By clicking the follow button, you are prompted to log in either using Facebook, Google, or an ArcGIS login. I urge you all to visit the site and follow the initiative. This will allow you to get notification about the latest news, data, and events relating to the Freight Activity Locator Hub. Next slide. In choosing the Hub platform, it allowed for a more variety of functionality and dynamic content than the previous application. We added an easy-to-navigate toolbar. Users can click on a heading at the top of the site to navigate to additional content and applications dealing with that specific heading. The headings currently include regional freight system, development opportunities, truck parking, and freight profiles. Additionally, we were able to integrate functionality including statistics, web apps, and documents. Next slide. With the help from Esri under a professional services contract, we were able to build 2 new applications using ArcGIS Experience Builder. ArcGIS Experience Builder empowers you to quickly transform your data into compelling web apps without writing a single line of code. Esri staff helped develop the initial prototype and then did a knowledge transfer with the Njtpa staff so that we could maintain the applications moving forward. Next slide. The ArcGIS Experience Builder applications provide a number of widgets to create a robust, interactive experience with dynamic charts, text, maps, and dashboards. The user can toggle between base year data and forecasted year data, hover over charts to get more detailed information on the data, and interact with the maps within the application. Additionally, based on the user's selections, commodity type in the commodity profiles, or subregions in the county profiles, data is filtered and displayed for your specific selection. The two Experience Builder applications are part of the overall Freight Activity Locator Hub site, even though they are individual applications. I think this shows the versatility of Hub and the ability to organize your data and tools around the theme or topic. Next slide. Our next steps will be to continue maintenance on the site, which will include adding new data and information as it is developed. We will also continue to monitor any new functionality as it becomes available, as well as look for feedback from our users on how to better enhance the user experience. Again, I encourage you all to visit the site and follow the initiative. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gabby. And a link to the site is also in the chat box. And the last tool we'll talk about today is our Goods Movement Strategies for Communities tool. Next slide, Jacob. The whole idea of the tool, and I'm putting a link to it also in the chat box, is to change the conversation from I've got an issue related to truck movement in my community to here's the situation, here are potential effective strategies. Now, how can we address the question or the situation? Next slide, please. So with this tool, you can choose your location, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, the kind of truck traffic you're talking about, the time of day, and then the kind of issue areas. And these questions and issues were developed talking with communities, talking to developers, talking to the trucking community, and then very quickly see the strategies available. Next slide, please. By the way, if you happen to be looking at this on a mobile device, it will automatically transfer to this kind of format to show you very quickly how to move into the strategies that you may want to consider in the community. Next slide, please. And the strategies we have, and this is an evolving system, are just a one-pager that tells you about it, what you need, where best examples are, and where you can get additional information so that you can continue that conversation. Next slide, please. So similar to Gabby, I urge you to try the model, and to give you some idea, again, this is a living tool. We're moving away from handbooks and into these interactive tools and repositories of knowledge. So we're going to be updating this module with the latest techniques that have moved into use and been proven both in the US and abroad for considerations. Over the next few months, we're going to be developing a module specific for rail freight activities in communities. And then particularly building on a lot of the information you've heard today, as well as all the industrial development, a good neighbor guide for communities, similar to what you've heard from Becky and Mike Ruane for considerations of industrial activity. And with that, I am going to say thank you, and thank you for your patience and joining us today, and turn this back over to Mary Amin to wrap us up.
Thank you, Ann. I will be brief because we're running a little bit over time, and I'm already seeing the numbers dropping off the attendance list. But I have to just thank all of our speakers, Brian Banazinski and Dan Desario, who talked about the industrial real estate outlook and the importance of land availability and regulatory efficiency. And I also want to thank our speakers from the public sector who talked about various analyses and tools. Becky Bradley from Lehigh Valley, Mike Ruane from Delaware Valley, and our own Gabrielle Fassel and Ann Strauss-Leader from NJTPA. And there's much food for thought here. This was excellent presentations by everyone. Let's continue the discussion, and a good start will be making the contents from today's presentations available to everyone. And again, thank you to our audience for participating, and a special thanks to Ann Strauss-Weeder and Jacob Rowinski for putting this together. So with that, have a wonderful day, and thank you again. Bye now.